Welcome back to Real Wealth Podcast. This is Mike Proctor with Leading Edge Financial Planning as a sponsor, and Dr. Elisa Stauffer. She is with Equipoise. She's starting her own firm with oncology and basically a cancer and blood doctor. So she knows all kinds of stuff like that, and we get to have a wonderful conversation about that today. So welcome on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited to dig in and talk a little bit about your background, what brought you to Wichita, what your areas of interest are around cancer. I know you do a lot in research and childhood cancers, especially. So Dr. Stauffer, what brought you to Wichita, or what was your path to come here?
Well, I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I was there for my whole life till I was about 31. And then I was working as a general pediatrician in Tulsa and working 70 hours a week and getting paid less than pretty much every other physician that I knew. And I realized if I'm going to work this hard, I'm going to do what I love, which is taking care of kids with cancer and blood disorders. So I quit my job and moved to New York to do a fellowship, which is how you get trained in a specialty for medicine.
All right.
And I did my fellowship on Long Island and while I was there, I met my husband, who is not a physician. He's an engineer, but met him in New York. And so after fellowship, we stayed in the New York area for several more years, with the exception of 1 year in Italy. And then after a while, I said, gosh, I really miss the Midwest, and, just felt a strong desire to kind of come home. But I really love Kansas. My mom's family is from Kansas for more than 100 years. And so I was really excited about the idea of moving out here. So we did. We packed up last year in the middle of the pandemic and got out here to take what I hoped was going to be my dream job. And it started off okay, but there were some issues that developed. It didn't turn out to be such a great fit. So I was facing things like I was working a ton of hours. It was a really high stress job, and I felt like I wasn't making the difference that I came out here to make for kids with cancer and blood disorders that I'm really committed to. So there were a series of impacts that led me to realize that I was going to have to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And one of those was the impact on my family. I have 3 kids, and my 1-year-old stopped saying mommy a few weeks after I started this job and didn't say it again until the week after I quit.
Oh, man. So
that was, one example of really stressful impact. And another was my health, that, after I had worked there about 6 or 7 months, I was working so much. I was so tired. I was so stressed. I noticed I was starting to have trouble breathing, just even when I did normal activities like walking up the stairs or walking around, and even had an episode where my heart briefly stopped and I started to lose consciousness. So I knew that my health was really insisting that I pay attention to it.
Yeah.
And so taking these things together, I said, all right, I'm going to have to make a decision. It was honestly really hard. I really loved a lot of the people that I was working with, and I had been really excited about that job, but I just knew I'm not being the wife and mother that I'm committed to being, and I'm not taking care of myself, which is going to catch up with me. Mm-hmm. And so I just had to make a decision. So I handed in my resignation. Again, it was really hard, but I knew it was the right thing to do when I finally got down to it. And sat down with my husband and said, okay, we just moved here and we haven't even finished unpacking yet. Do you want to stay here or do you want to move again? And he would kind of like to live in the Rocky Mountains, for example. So we decided we wanted to stay here. We really love Kansas. We love Wichita. It's such a great town. Has so much to offer. And we had a few conversations about how invested do we really want to be here? And how much do we want to really invest in Wichita and Kansas? And we decided a lot. Mm-hmm. So, for me on a personal way, it's kind of a chance to give back to a larger sense of community that helped make me who I am, Even though I grew up in Oklahoma, I spent most of my summers in Kansas. And all of it taken together and more it helps shape me, So I appreciate that. And so I said, well, I'm committed to helping kids with cancer and blood disorders. And if we're going to stay right here, there's really only one thing I can do, which is to open my own practice.
And from that, you have Equipoise.
Right. So Equipoise is the name of the practice, and the full name is Equipoise Healthcare. Equipoise is a concept in clinical research, meaning to balance two or more arms equally, even though you don't actually know which arm will be better.
Okay.
It's a necessary ethical concept in order to be able to perform clinical research. You suspect that maybe your new treatment is going to be better than your old one, or you wouldn't bother to do the trial in the first place. But on the other hand, you really don't know. If you knew, you wouldn't need to do a trial in the first place. So it's the ability to balance two or more things as equal, even though you actually don't know.
Right. And that's getting back into your research background.
Right. So most pediatric hematologists, oncologists, like myself, have a lot of experience in research in terms of helping patients enroll in clinical trials. Because we face such limited treatment options for our patients, we are usually very proactive in involving patients in clinical trials. If it was your child, and we've already exhausted the 2 or 3 options that exist, I think most people would say, yes, I'm yet. Now, not everyone does, and there are some good reasons why some people choose not to, but a lot of people want to. And so, that's something that kind of comes with my field a little bit. And then also I had worked on my PhD in translational research when I was on Long Island. Mm-hmm. And translational research is the ability to take the science knowledge that is discovered in a laboratory and apply it to the clinical setting at the patient's bedside. So you need somebody who's got a little bit of laboratory science skills and knowledge, and somebody who also has some clinical skills and knowledge. Combine it and stand in the gap. You have translational research. So I bring that to the table, and I feel like the ability to facilitate and advocate for patients on clinical trials is something that I'm very good at. So that's going to be a part of Equipoise Healthcare. Aside from treating kids with cancer and blood disorders, there will also be an arm of facilitating clinical research.
So you're going to be out on the front line of trying to figure out new ways to attack childhood cancer, new ways to figure it out. Because when's the last major breakthrough we've had in cancer?
In childhood cancer?
In childhood cancer treatment.
So in the last 20 years, there's only been one new drug that was specifically developed for a childhood cancer. There have been some other therapies that we use newly, which were developed for adult cancers, and then we've adapted it to childhood cancer. But specifically developed for a childhood cancer, just one new drug in 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's all that's been done.
Right. Most of the medications that we use were developed sometime between 1950 and 1980s.
What are some of the challenges involved in that type of research on developing a new treatment for childhood cancers?
That's a great question. So it can be very expensive to do any kind of research. Can be very expensive, and a lot of times the investment needs to happen on the level of laboratory science, but the money-making stuff is rarely at that level. So you have a disconnect between where the investing needs to happen and where the profit comes back, right? So, few people, if any, depending on your point of view, have unlimited financial resources, including corporations or institutions or, like the National Institute of Health or anybody like that. So they have to think about where they're going to put their money. And limited resources means they want to put it where they can sort of get the best bang for their buck in as short a time frame as possible. Problem is, you need to do that foundational investigation first. That might take 10 or 20 years before it goes from the laboratory bench to actually applying it in a patient. So most of the time, most entities that fund these things don't kind of have that patience, you know. It's called research because you have to often search again, and it requires going back and forth to over the same concepts and new concepts repeatedly. So that's one reason. Just in general, that's true of all research. But another issue specific to pediatrics is it's hard to do research on children. Children are more vulnerable in general than adults. The impacts are harder to predict because their bodies are still developing, and we know less about that in general. And children cannot consent for themselves. Older children, like teenagers, can assent, which means they agree to it, but legally their parents still have to consent. So ethically, some people feel like, you know, there are ethical challenges in performing research on somebody who cannot consent for themselves. So, of course, we use the proxy of the parent or whoever is the child's closest caregiver to be making a decision in the best interest of the child, you know, but ultimately it's the child who has to live with the consequences.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there are a lot of challenges in doing that. Now, for those of us who have spent our whole careers in pediatrics, we're just sort of used to navigating that world. It's just part of it. It's not that big of a deal for someone like me. But if you're somebody who's used to working with adults, like you've been doing a lot of adult research, and now you're going to try to do a clinical trial in kids, it can be sometimes very challenging to get used to the difference in paradigm that you have to function within in order to perform high-quality ethical research in a pediatric population. So that's another challenge. Now, luckily, in the last 10 to 15 years, new government legislation, even some before that, but especially in the last 10 years, new government legislation has pushed pharmaceutical companies towards more pediatric trials. So right now in Europe, for example, any medication that's developed with potential for pediatric use is required to be investigated for pediatrics. So that kind of legislation helps drive the industry. However, there are still a lot of challenges to it. They have trouble recruiting. They design a trial that's maybe not very practical in terms of the patient experience, or sometimes could be downright painful in terms of the patient experience. Things which are no big deal in an adult trial, like getting your blood drawn once a week.
Yeah.
Ooh, big deal if you're 5 years old, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
So they have to, you know, really rethink their whole approach. And if they're not successful at doing that, they won't be successful at enrolling patients. So the trial can fail for other reasons. To me, that's a big problem because potentially helpful therapies never make it to market because they just never completed the trial for it, you know? And so my patients might be missing out on potentially helpful therapies. I mean, that's a big deal when I'm telling you the side effects of our drugs from 1950.
Yeah.
You know, or when I'm telling you that there are no more therapeutic options for your child and you've got less than 6 months to live. That's a big deal. So while legislation has helped, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of empowering industry and academia to actually perform high-quality, ethical, practical clinical trials in kids. So I hope to, you know, in my career, be able to be part of facilitating that too. And a lot of it is just about being really in touch and attuned with the patient experience, you know. I think when you're the one there holding that kid's hand through these conversations or through the blood draws or whatever it is, when you sit down and listen to mom explain that she can't afford to miss any more work because if she does, she's used up all her FMLA, she's going to lose her health insurance, and then how will she get treatment for her kid?
Right.
When you're having those kind of conversations, you're just getting really attuned to the patient experience. Then to me, it just makes me want to advocate for them because I think we can do this better.
So what are some things that you can do at your practice now that you're going to have organizational control? that help push those types of initiatives forward?
Oh, that's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked. So one thing is to really streamline the flow. A big part of the patient experience with cancer is, whether it's an adult or a kid, the amount of time that either the adult or the caregiver of the kid has to miss work or miss out on other life activities. Like kids, they miss a lot of school, they miss out with friends, they can't participate in activities. Sometimes that's because they're too sick, but other times it's because they are at the doctor's office all day, maybe once a week, maybe every day. Mm-hmm. I have some patients that I see almost every day, and some of those for months at a time. Some of them are on chemo for years. I've had patients that I've treated for 3 years or 5 years or even more with chemotherapy. And so you can imagine FMLA covers a parent for 3 months, and that's unpaid. And that parent still has to pay all their bills, take care of all their other kids, get their kid to all these doctor's appointments. Oh, they can't leave them alone because there has to be an adult in attendance all the time, so on and so forth. Let alone now add in unexpected hospitalizations, other specialty appointments, and now your kid is like nauseous and in pain and can't participate in things. It is really an untenable burden of care. And that doesn't even count just the sheer emotional trauma of what you're going through. Yeah. Right? So I really want to create streamlined processes that have the patient spending as little time as possible in the clinic or the infusion center or the hospital, so that as much time as possible is living as normal of a life as possible, which is going to mean different things for different patients, right? They're going to have different considerations, but for a lot of patients, that's going to really help. And for a lot of parents, I also want to give them nursing relationships, so that when a parent is having an issue, they pick up the phone and they can get straight through to their nurse that knows their kid, who saw them yesterday and knows everything that's going on. Instead of, okay, I'm going to call, I'm going to work through a phone tree, and now I'm going to leave a message, and maybe the nurse will call me back tomorrow, but she doesn't actually know who I am, right?
Or it could be some outsourced nurse that has no clue about anything.
Right, exactly. And that
they give you very general advice.
Exactly. So I want to create a system where the nurses have a lot of involvement in managing the patients, so that the families and the nurses can basically help get things done as efficiently as possible, also with as good quality as possible. I, as the physician, I maybe spend 10, 15 minutes with the patient. And a longer visit, maybe it's even 30 minutes or an hour if we have a really long conversation. But the nurse is in there all day. They are the ones that cleaned up every single vomit. I just get a report like, patient has vomited 4 times. Okay, no skin off my back, really, But the nurse is really present to the impact, and I'm not saying that I dismiss it either. But I'm just saying that the nurse is so involved with the patient, and they really get what the experience is for the patient. So I think that they should be empowered to be involved in helping manage that. So that's another way that I want to help improve the experience. I also encourage the involvement of a social worker wherever possible, even in families who don't feel like they have any social worker needs. They're still just a tremendous resource for helping families through unexpected issues, bad news, or helping coordinate family meetings and things like that. And for families who have more needs, they help so much. One thing that families stress about a lot is the financial side of cancer. How are they going to pay for all these bills, especially when they can't even pay for their apartment, right? A social worker can help with both of those things. In Kansas, we have health coverage so that kids with cancer can be treated. Now, if you have private insurance, you're still going to pay quite a lot, probably in copays and premiums and that sort of thing. All right. I am also going to be looking at how I can partner with other institutions to reduce or eliminate the cost of cancer care.
Yeah. Well, actually, you bring that up, and I didn't realize that you got involved on that level too. I have a friend, Chris, that he's got a nonprofit that can help out with
Oh,
specific Wichita area cases if health insurance premiums have become an issue to make
oh,
sure
wow.
they have continuous coverage. Chris Ariano over at Hinkle Law Firm.
Oh, okay, super. Well, I would love to know about a group like that. And there are several groups in Kansas that work to support these patients in different ways. That's really important. Everyone knows, of course, St. Jude gives free care.
Uh huh.
What people often don't realize about St. Jude is you have to be accepted to St. Jude. You
Oh,
can't just go to St. Jude and get
okay.
free care. You actually have to be accepted. And they usually won't accept you if you've had any prior therapy unless you're kind of starting over, like in a relapse case where you have to switch therapies. So it's not just as so simple as like, hey, we'll just go to Memphis, right? Now they do accept a lot of patients, but it's also not guaranteed. So, as an example, what the pediatric oncologists in Tulsa have done is they have partnered with St. Jude to become a St. Jude affiliate.
Okay.
And all the kids with cancer in the Tulsa and surrounding area get free cancer care in Tulsa.
Wow.
And then St. Jude additionally reviews all of their cases. And any therapy that Tulsa doesn't offer, the kids can go to St. Jude, who already knows them because they've been reviewing their case the whole time. And they can just get it right there for free. So that's pretty awesome. And we'll be looking into that. But ultimately, ensuring equitable access to care, which is not just about medical bills, but it's also just about your ability to survive on a basic level while you have to be at the doctor's office, 4 to 6 hours a day, 5 days a week for months on end, right? Is a big goal of mine.
So, with that much time commitment in cancer care, how much do you anticipate you could cut down from a typical experience?
Okay, great. So I was just going over some of the processes that we could implement a few weeks ago. And so, for example, what right now takes 4 hours, I think I could get that down to maybe 1 or 2 hours
Wow. So you're
for
so
certain types of chemotherapy.
this feels like, I told this story about how it's just this day that just everything fell into place. And even when I walked into the tag office to register my truck, it was my turn to go to the window.
Wow.
And my buddies were like, "You lost me. You're full of it." but it sounds like that's what you're bringing to the cancer treatment space.
That is how it has felt a little bit. The first I would encourage people, if you have a dream, go for it, but also don't get discouraged. The first couple people I talked to were kind of like, no, it's too hard. And I had heard from lots of other physicians, it's too hard to run a practice nowadays. And the first one or two banks or loan lender organizations I reached out to, they said, no, we're not going to finance you. And then, I just kept talking to people. I like to talk, so that's easy. But I just kept talking to people and, pretty soon, within like 2 or 3 weeks, this person knows that person and they might be a helpful resource and so on and so forth. And within a few weeks, I had gathered a team around me, which they've done this before. They know exactly what to do. I've never run a business before. I've never opened a practice before, but I have a consultant who meets with me once a week. He gives me my homework each week. Come back the next week. Here's what I did, Bob. Okay, great. Here's what you need to do next week. He lays it out for me. I have a lender who knows what he's doing. And, in medical practices, a little bit different model than other kinds of businesses because it's a service. You don't have a lot of goods and products. So if the business were to go under, what kind of collateral do you have? Your collateral is the physician.
Right.
Okay. So I asked my lender, it's great that you're going to give me the loan. And so thank you. And, how do you kind of deal with the uncertainty of the whole situation? Because, you know that I don't have experience running this kind of thing. And there is a chance it could fail. And so how do you make that decision? How do you deal with the uncertainty? And he said, ultimately, it comes down to whether or not I believe in you. And I believe in you.
Well, that's nice.
That was just great, you know? So having those people around you, it makes such a big difference. And so they mentor me, and I've got some other people too. You know, my realtors are great, and they're out right on the ball. And, you know, just, you get this team around you, and they really, you know, I think of Joshua holding his arms up and starting to let them down, and then the battle would win when his arms are up, and the battle would fail when the arms are down. I mean, Joshua from the Old Testament in the Bible. Okay. And it's like you have these people around you that hold your arms up.
No, that's an awesome illustration. Love that. Yeah. And starting a business is insanely hard if you're to do it all on your own, not knowing anything. There's so many things that you have to learn that I'm sure you experienced. If you would have gone into it knowing everything you needed to know to get it done, are you sure you would have done it still?
That's a great question. You know, I sort of love adventure, but not in a physical way, like in a mental way.
Sure.
You know, like I'm not really like cliff diving or anything. But I do love shaking things up in my life. I wonder if I would have. You know, there'd be kind of nothing to discover. If I thought that I know everything about it, why would I? There'd be nothing to discover. I love to learn.
That's interesting.
I think I would maybe find it really boring.
It's
interesting because not knowing was a roadblock I had to overcome.
Right.
Like, who am I to start something like this, you know? And not only a new practice, but I have big visions for how I want it to grow, the impact I want to make, how I want it to change the landscape of even my field and in the Midwest, you know? So that's big. That's also thanks to my banker, Kyle Nation, for encouraging me to dream that big, because I gave him my first plan and he was like, I think you can do bigger. I think you should do bigger.
Nice.
What would you like to ask for if you could really come up with anything? And I was like, oh, well, I mean, if you really want to know, you know, and I just so appreciated that encouragement, you know. So it was part of me thinks, well, who am I? And I don't know how to do this. I don't have an MBA and any of that kind of stuff, you know. So I did have to overcome that roadblock. On the other hand, that's also part of what makes it exciting.
In entrepreneurship, it's one of those things where it's like, there's all these false peaks where you get there and you're like, oh, we could go further.
Oh, right. Sure. That makes sense. I didn't know about that, but thanks for the warning.
Yeah. It's fun though. That's the adventure side is there's so many new things you can learn. And once you get there, there's a new layer of complexity. Kind of like when you hire your first employee, you know, your payroll takes this huge jump. And then your next one is not quite as big of a jump. And, you know, you keep going and then your organization doubles and then every time your organization doubles, your communication systems all change. They have to. They have to adapt.
Okay.
So it's a very basic example is when I brought on my first assistant to help me out with just paperwork and trying to stay organized when I started this. And then I hired on Dayton, who's our paraplanner, and he's an associate advisor now. But going from 1 to 3, I could still talk to him one-on-one. Now we've got James, currently he's operating out of Florida, and then Brian's out in Colorado. And then Emma's here in town, but so our communication systems have changed. And in a few more employees, we'll have to change structure again. But at these different phases, you don't realize how much change your company is going to experience even after you get going.
Wow. Well, that's exciting.
Yeah. You have that to look forward to.
Yeah, that's great.
But that's why you have Bob.
Right.
And that's why you have business coaches and people around you to help you get there. Hold your hands up.
Yeah, exactly. So important. And I have a really supportive spouse. I think that makes a big difference. You know, this would be much harder if he was not supportive of this. You know, I guess it reminds me of the first time a pharmaceutical representative, a drug rep, brought me a coffee. Felt like I have arrived. You know, I am now important enough that somebody has brought me a coffee. You know, and then a few months later, it was kind of like, all right, I have bigger issues than coffee. You know, Also reminds me of a friend of mine who had he had started a business that was becoming really successful, and he himself had a mentor who had a business that was like worth more than $100 million.
Oh, cool.
Okay, so he says to me, when you're kind of in more the beginning stages, or even if you've been at it for a while, but you don't have that much revenue going, you think, well, when I get to $1 million, all my problems will be solved, and then the goal, when I get to $10 million, all my problems will be solved. He said, now I'm at $100 million. And what I can tell you is now all I've got is $100 million problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that goes along with your multiple peaks.
It's true. It's true. The problems don't go away. They get bigger.
Right.
But kind of like in life, where the older we get, hopefully we're getting better at enduring suffering.
Right.
Hard things come up and we get better at dealing with it.
Right.
And processing it.
There's a saying I love that the only time you're not going to have problems is when you're 6 feet under. So choose the problems you want to have.
Absolutely.
So I use that to guide me a lot. Like, I know that the grass is not greener and I'm never going to be problem free, but sometimes I just feel like I'd like a different problem, maybe only for a while even, and that's okay. So I say, all right, well, I'm going to, whatever it is, I'm going to rearrange my furniture. I'm going to go get a new job, whatever it is, I'd like to have a different set of problems. So I'm not under the delusion that starting this is going to be problem-free by any means. I'm sure it's going to entail problems that I can't even imagine right now. But I'm looking forward to discovering what those are and figuring out solutions.
Yeah, and those great people around you are going to help you when the gut punches happen.
That's right.
Because it'll happen.
I'm sure. Don't scare me away from this.
But you'll do great. You'll get through it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure it will. And it's going to be really exciting. It's going to require a lot of growth and just constantly going back to what am I committed to? I'm committed to serving kids with cancer and blood disorders. I'm committed to family, and that includes my patients' families, and it includes my family, And so as long as I keep returning to those commitments, I know that while I might experience some pain along the way, I won't have regrets.
Absolutely. Pain's guaranteed.
That's right.
Regrets are optional.
That's right.
Okay, so as far as raising awareness around childhood cancer, there were a few points we were talking about before we started recording. One you mentioned was the bone marrow registry.
Yeah, so the bone marrow registry is something that few people know about, but it's really important. When a patient has cancer and the cancer relapses, oftentimes there are limited therapies available. And in kids, we use stem cell transplant as one potential therapy, probably more often than we do in adults. The reason why is because kids are more resilient and able to tolerate transplant better than adults.
Okay.
Another reason is because, like I told you, there have not been a lot of new therapies developed. So when we have a patient who's relapsed, we don't have a lot of other options.
Okay.
Okay. And another reason is because transplant is able to be used for some genetic diseases as well as for childhood cancer. So when I say transplant, I mean stem cell transplants. Okay. Stem cells are found in a lot of places, but importantly, your bone marrow. That's a big place where you can find a lot of stem cells. Stem cells, for anyone who's not aware, it's a what we call pluripotent cell. That means it can become any kind of other cell.
All right.
Okay. And you have different levels of stem cells. You could have a stem cell that's committed to being a blood cell, but it could still become any type of blood cell. Or you could have a really early stem cell that could literally become a nose, a foot, or anything. Okay. Stem cells are really cool to work with. My friend accidentally grew a beating heart in her test tube once when she was researching stem cells.
Accidentally?
Yeah. So she had stem cells in a test tube. They were early stem cells. That means they can become anything. And she was culturing them. So she wasn't trying to make them necessarily do something, but she's just trying to grow them. Okay. And, when stem cells receive different sort of environmental signals, then they differentiate, meaning they commit to being a certain type of cell. Well, one day she pulled out her test tube, and these were mouse stem cells.
Okay.
She pulled out her test tube, and inside was a heart. Her stem cells had differentiated into a heart.
Wow.
Yeah.
A mouse heart?
Yep.
Huh.
Yep.
You said it was beating?
I think she told me it was beating.
Wow.
I didn't get to see it. She threw it away.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, right? So we use stem cells for pediatric cancers in a lot of genetic diseases and in relapse cancers. And especially the most common indication is for relapse leukemia. Okay. And to use stem cells, you need a match. Now, sometimes when you're pregnant, you may see advertisements for, hey, do you want to bank your stem cells? I will tell you, I did not bank any of my kids' stem cells because we don't use your own stem cells. There is literally zero situations right now in current medicine where we would use your own stem cells to treat something that you have. Because clearly, your own stem cells did not do such a great job in the first place if they gave you this disease. So we would use different stem cells. There is a type of transplant called autologous stem cell transplants where we do use your stem cells, but only for rescue after a severe chemo. And we only use that for certain types of solid tumors. It doesn't actually do anything to treat the tumor, okay? And we'll harvest those stem cells when we need them, so you don't need to bank them. However, we would love for you to donate your cord blood, which I tried to do with all 3 of my kids, but my hospital wasn't participating in the program. And we would love for people to sign up for the bone marrow registry. And it's real easy, doesn't hurt, it's free. They send you a kit in the mail. You swab the inside of your cheek with a Q-tip, put it in a tube that they send you.
That's easy.
And you fill out a card with your contact information. You send it back. What happens then is they test your cells from the inside of your mouth to know whether you're going to be a match for a patient. They enter your match information into a database, and it just sits there. And then whenever I have a patient or any of us have a patient who needs to have a stem cell transplant, we do a similar test on our patient. Ours is a blood draw. And we enter that into the database, and we see, are there any matches in the registry? Okay, if we want ultimately for most of the time, you want to have a really good match. A 10 out of 10 match is usually preferred, or a 9 out of 10 match. Okay. And a lot of times we can't find a match. In fact, your chances of being called up if you're entered in the registry is only 1 in 200.
Wow.
That's your chance of being called up to donate. And if you donate, what you're donating is bone marrow. And so what they do is they put a little needle in the back of your hip and just pull out bone marrow. Okay.
Is it painful?
A little bit painful.
Okay.
Not like you're going to need IV pain medicines.
But it does save someone's life.
It saves somebody's life. You may be sore for about 2 or 3 days. Okay. That's about it. And then your body will make new bone marrow. So
see, I had this image of I'd have to, if I got a kit in the mail, I'd have to do that on myself to figure that out.
Oh, God, no.
You're like swabbing my mouth? All right, fine.
Yeah. Right, exactly. It's so easy. And your chances of actually being called up are only 1 in 200. Because it takes so many special details have to fall into place for you to be a match with somebody. Meanwhile, it's quite common that we can't find good matches for our patients. So in order to have enough people in the registry to have a good match for most or all of my patients, we need several times more than what we have.
Okay.
So I need a ratio of more like 1 to 1,000 in order to find a good match. Okay. Obviously, just the more you have, the better chances you are of having a good match.
Does that come only into play on a local level, or is it a national?
It's national.
Okay.
You can be anywhere in the country and donate to somebody anywhere else in the country.
Okay.
And they'll fly your stem cells to the hospital where the patient is. So you can be anywhere in the country, I will say. Now, if my patient cannot find a good match, they either can't get treated and then they'll die, or they'll get treated with a poor match, in which case they have much more pain and suffering through the process of their transplant, and also a much higher rate of death due to transplant. as well as rejection of the transplant. So it really matters. It's really especially affecting people of color. My patients of color have very few matches in the registry. And it's understandable that a lot of people of color feel hesitant to sign up on the registry because there's been a lot of abuse in the past of people of color by medicine and science. One of the most famous examples being the research done concerning syphilis in Tuskegee, where they didn't treat patients for syphilis and didn't tell them they weren't being treated for syphilis so that they could watch the natural evolution of syphilis over the course of 30 years.
Oh my.
Highly unethical, and that research was performed exclusively by white doctors on Black men. So it's understandable that these communities have a deep sense of distrust, and now we're asking them to essentially give their DNA over in mass numbers. I get it. And at the same time, there's a big impact on these patients. My patients of color are far disproportionately affected in their failure to find good matches for transplants. So I really encourage people to sign up for the bone marrow registry as much as possible. I've signed up. My husband has signed up. And I encourage everyone who can to sign up. It really will make a big difference to a patient if you're the one that gets called up.
Okay. Well, we'll put that in the notes on where they can go. They can click on it. And
yep. You can just Google bone marrow registry.
Oh,
and
even easier.
Comes right up.
Okay.
Yep.
So we don't have any excuses now.
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
That's right. Beamatch.com.
Hey, Google, search. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Set everyone's.
I also encourage everyone to donate blood, especially during the pandemic. We've had a huge blood shortage. The blood drives got canceled and the need for blood went up. You may take it for granted that if you needed a blood transfusion, you're just going to show up in the hospital and get it.
Okay.
And for a lot of people, that is still true. But if you're a patient who gets a lot of blood transfusions, as kids with cancer and blood disorders often do, then you often develop special blood requirements because you may develop antibodies or, these kind of sensitive reactions, and then you require special blood. And my patients have been waiting sometimes 2 or 3 days to get blood transfusions, especially during the pandemic, because we can't find a good match for them. This can be really dangerous when they're already developing critical symptoms due to low platelets or low blood. And sometimes I have patients who are bleeding while they're waiting on platelets, but it's taken me a whole day or two to find a match platelet unit for them. So really encourage people to donate blood, and you can make an appointment at your local Red Cross here in Wichita. The Red Cross is the primary collector of blood. And go donate. And again, especially communities of color, we need that. And our sickle cell patients, who are usually also people of color, they use a lot of blood transfusions, and they have probably the highest rate of antibodies of any and special blood requirements of any population. Yet I don't have very many match donors for them either. So really encourage people to donate blood.
Now more than ever with COVID and everything, it's been a big issue, big problem. So
yep, we've been on critical low supply for pretty much the whole pandemic all across the country. So
that's a way we can all help. Absolutely. What about the current survival rates? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yes, thank you. So one thing I like to impart to people, especially if you're facing a diagnosis or somebody who has a pediatric cancer, as much as we have seen limited improvement in the therapies we deliver, we have improved our supportive care quite a lot. So that's things like nausea, pain management, knowing how to prevent and manage infections in an immunocompromised patient, things like that. That's all under the umbrella of supportive care. We've improved that a lot. And that has been the main reason that we've improved survival over the years.
Okay.
So when you have a pediatric cancer, it is a really different experience compared to adult cancers. Kids, for one thing, are just a lot more resilient. They will play until they can't. And they are usually come to the table healthier to start with compared to your average older adult who may have a lot of comorbidities. That means other diseases at the same time. For example, none of my little kids that I treat have ever smoked or used alcohol or illegal drugs, So they haven't had that wear and tear on their bodies. And sometimes they do have significant multiple medical problems if they, just from bad luck or maybe they have a genetic syndrome that predisposes them to certain issues such as trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, which has a lot of medical problems associated with it. And they also get a lot of leukemia. So we can see sometimes very complicated patients who come to us already ill for various reasons, but they are just so much more resilient. And our overall 5-year survival rate across all types of pediatric cancer is about 70 to 80%. Now, that doesn't mean that every day at work, 20% of my patients are dying. That means over the course of 5 years, I can expect that 20 to 30% of my cancer patients will pass away. Okay. And that's a much better rate than the rate of adult cancer. Now, adult oncologists have done a great job at extending the lifespan of patients with cancer. So where something that might have, like pancreatic cancer, when I started training almost 20 years ago, pancreatic cancer was basically go home, set your affairs in order because there's nothing we can do, especially if you're in a later stage. Now, pancreatic cancer may live several years before they pass away. It's ultimately maybe still not curable in many cases. Some are in early stages, but at least they can extend the lifespan. So they have done a great job in that, and that changes the way their statistics look a lot. But in pediatrics, we're overall have better outcomes. Okay. Now, it also depends what kind of cancer you get. If you get standard risk acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is our single most common cancer type, we have about a 95% survival for that over 5 years.
Wonderful.
Whereas certain brain tumors, we still have dismal prospects. So there's a big difference. And then, you're involved with Leukemia Lymphoma Society. So we would be remiss not to discuss lymphoma there a little bit. Lymphoma is pretty common in kids too, actually, especially teenagers. I say common. In my daily life, lymphoma is common. It's still a rare disease overall.
Sure.
But, we tend to have pretty good outcomes with the most common types of lymphoma, but there are 67 different subtypes of lymphoma, and they have drastically different outcomes. So there are some which, really there are no treatment for at all, like natural killer lymphoma.
Okay.
There's no treatment. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a really, fortunately, a rare one, but a very bad one to get. On the other hand, things like early stage Hodgkin lymphoma, certain subtypes of that may have even approaching 100% survival.
Okay.
So there's a big difference there too. And we definitely need a lot more research in the different kinds of lymphoma to see what we can improve.
Right. So maybe another question I had was, is there anything we can do to decrease cancer in kids?
So, most cancers in kids are genetically and embryologically mediated, meaning that either you had some mutation in your genes that's going to set you on a course towards developing cancer in your early years, or some embryologic process that's going to set you on a course to developing cancer in your early years. And not much you can really do about that, at least as far as we currently know or have available. There is some research showing that breastfeeding reduces the incidence of leukemia. Leukemia is the most common type of childhood cancer, and breastfeeding can have a significant reduction on the incidence of that. That being said, most bottle-fed...
And you said maybe over 20%, maybe over 25%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pretty significant. That being said, most bottle-fed babies still don't develop leukemia.
Of course.
So why some do and some don't, probably a genetic or embryologic process that was just waiting for the right environmental cue. a big important part of childhood cancer, and especially leukemia and lymphoma, which are essentially cancers of the immune system, is that kids are developing their immune system. So two leukemias with the same name in different age groups do not behave the same. How I treat a leukemia in a 5-year-old versus a 50-year-old, very, very different. We have about 95% survival in a 5-year-old with standard risk leukemia, whereas a 50-year-old with the same acute lymphoblastic leukemia requires very intensive therapy and still has poor outcomes. So they really behave differently. And the difference is the kids are developing their immune systems. So it's like this developing immune system got hijacked somewhere along the way. We know that breastfeeding helps develop the immune system because part of the mom's immune system is delivered through the breast milk, as well as breast milk contains a lot of prebiotics, which are the things that help your healthy bacteria grow, and probiotics, which are the healthy bacteria. And those in turn interact with the developing immune system in the gut and teaches the immune system what to tolerate and what not to tolerate. So what should I attack, like a germ, versus what not? Like, hey, these are allergens. You don't actually need to attack them, right? When that process doesn't quite go right, you get things like allergies, asthma, eczema, autoimmune disorders, and cancers at an early age.
And that speaks to if a baby can start off with a better foundation.
Right, like better immune development, right? There are other things too. There is something called the two clean hypothesis, which says, hey, human beings were evolved to grow up, rolling around in a swamp and hanging out with the pigs and whatever, we used to be like really, quite frankly, very dirty. And modern society, a lot of times we're super ultra clean, Clorox and Windex and Lysol on everything, right? Oh, did the baby drop the pacifier on the floor? Now we're going to wash it with soap before he gets it back, right? And if we have a pet, it's probably getting frequently groomed. It's inside most of the time. And, heaven forbid the baby chew on a dog toy or something like that, right? So, and it comes from a good place, right? Because there are really very real serious diseases that come from being too dirty, like parasites.
Yep.
Yuck. I don't want that, and I don't want my kids to have that. On the other hand, they probably help develop all that dirtiness exposure, and the organisms in it, including some parasites, probably help regulate and develop our early immune systems. And in the ultra clean environment, you don't get that. So, for example, they've shown that kids who grow up with a pet have a lower incidence of asthma because their immune system was learned from the time that they were babies to tolerate those allergens.
Interesting.
So there's a whole complicated world of exposures and like a feedback loop where the allergens and the healthy germs inside of us help teach our immune systems how to behave. And conversely, our immune system decides which allergens and healthy germs it's going to tolerate. So they talk back and forth to each other. And this kind of, in the end, gives you the immune system you're going to have. It's still malleable even later in life. But there's a big developmental process happening in those first 5 years.
Yeah, a ton of that's going on when they're little kids.
Right, exactly. So that's a big player in the development of leukemia and lymphoma in little kids.
Wow. To recap a little bit, practical things we can do to help out are 1, go Google
Bone Marrow Registry.
Bone Marrow Registry. 2, give blood at a Red Cross drive, or just call the Red Cross up and go give blood.
Yep. Right now, right. Exactly. Don't wait for a drive. Just right now, they're not doing a lot of drives and you have to make an appointment. It used to be walk-in and right now they're doing appointments because of the pandemic.
Another thing people can do is they can support research and organizations that support patients in research like LLS, Leukemia and Lymphoma Society.
Yes. And LLS does a great job. I think there's a lot of mistrust in who do I give to? And there's so many causes you could give to. And,
Right.
and in pediatric cancer, we have about 200 nonprofit organizations that are there just to support families with pediatric cancer,
Right.
as well as research. So LLS is one of the bigger ones, and I think they do a great job. They provide so many different things. They support a lot of big research from the basic science level, that's like the stuff in the laboratory, all the way to clinical research. And they also support patients who are going through the experience. They will, they have a team that will come to the patient's house and check on them and help them, like if they haven't been able to get their basic needs met. So and everything in between, they help patients navigate the very complicated health system that we have. So they do so much really important work there that is really impactful. And a lot of patients depend on LLS to help them through the process.
And that's so great to hear all the things that LLS does. One of the things when we had Colson and Liam, when they were young, both of them certainly were under 5 when they were going through the biggest challenges that they had medically. That was really tough, as a family. And I know that isn't even as much as a lot of people go through, even though we were traveling out of town for specialized doctor's visits and trying to figure out what in the world's going on with their kids. They don't know, they're in pain, they're suffering. It's really hard to be there. And, it is a lot of suffering within the family. What can people do? Is there a way that they can help out with families that are going through some of these really difficult situations with kids that are fighting cancer?
That's a great question. And there are several things that people can do. I think, first of all, you have to recognize that pediatric cancer, while it's rare, it's not that rare. Mm-hmm. By the time kids have turned 20 years old, 1 in 300 will have had a childhood cancer.
Right.
So it's not actually that rare. You're going to know somebody who's had cancer as a kid. Mm-hmm. And if you think right now that you don't, you probably do, and you just don't know that they had cancer. All right. So it's important to lose that mentality like, oh, this is so rare and it won't happen to me. It's going to happen to somebody mm-hmm. just with an incidence that high. Okay. And so that makes it personal. And I really encourage people to find an organization that they feel like makes a difference, that they enjoy working with, and just be committed to it. For some people, that means donating money. For some people, that means volunteering. For other people, it might mean helping out in other ways, and you have to see what you can give of yourself. Do you have more time available or more money available? Or maybe you're the type of person who's great with emotional support or, creativity, something like that. All of us have talents and gifts to use. They're there to be used. And I think, it's important to find that place in the community where you can give back. So with over 200 childhood cancer nonprofit organizations, how do you choose? Well, for one thing, I usually encourage people to go local.
Okay.
And that could mean a local chapter of a larger group like Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And we have our local chapter here in Wichita. Or it could mean one of Wichita's more small nonprofit organizations like Wichita's Littlest Heroes.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And there's also a bunch of others. As long as it's a sound organization using ethical sound principles for managing, so they're not just, stealing people's monies under the guise of a good cause, you can't go wrong, right? And you're going to get so much more satisfaction and reward in terms of knowing that you help people out. And someday you might be the person who needs help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So you'll be part of building that now. And when you need it, it'll be there for you.
Yep. Yeah, it's part of life. I mean, we never know the challenges that we're going to come up against. And when we do come up against them, it's a whole lot better to do it together than by ourselves.
Exactly. So I think Leukemia Lymphoma Society is a great organization. My husband and I have been to some of their events, and I was really impressed with what I learned about them at that time. And so if you were going to choose something, I think that's a great one to choose.
Well, that's great, because that's what I'm working with right now on trying to raise some money starting next year.
Great.
Yeah.
Super. Wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, Dr. Stauffer, thank you so much for coming on and sharing about your entrepreneurial journey and how this is a major, family and lifestyle shift for you. And entrepreneurship is going to let you do the innovation, make the impact that you want to have, and also have the life for you and your family that you want to have. It's really amazing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And also giving us some tips on how we can help people, others live the best life possible. And someday we may be in those shoes as well.
Unfortunately, but yes.
We'll look forward to having you on again as we can hear updates on how your practice launch is going, because it's coming in January, right?
Should be open in January.
Should be. But, anything can happen between now and then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for today. And thanks so much again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.